Hello everyone, David here. I've been really enjoying playing Watch Dogs Legion, not least because of its amazing modern recreation of London. Now I know Parliament Square and St James's Park extremely well, so let's go there and just compare some of the scenes in-game to what they look like in real life. Let's go. So I think it's worth starting here on the edge of Parliament Square. This is where you start in the real game, like after you've done the tutorial mission, and this is where your first safe house is. It's a pub called the Earl's Fortune. Now, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but that pub doesn't exist in real life. Instead, in the real world, this is the Supreme Court, so still an incredibly important building, but yeah, very different. I don't know exactly why they decided to change it, probably for a number of reasons, like they wanted your starting place in the game to be near a really recognisable landmark. And also, to make the gameplay simpler, I think they compressed several roads into one. So even though there's about 2 or 3 roads back to St James's Park in that direction, they've made it a single one in the game. And I think that was probably quite a smart decision, just to make the game flow more nicely. So the Earl's Fortune might not be real, but I think they based it quite heavily on this pub, the Sherlock Holmes, which is just around the corner from Charing Cross. If you look at the typeface of the pub name, and the hanging baskets outside, and especially the kind of Victorian-style lanterns. There's a lot going on here that's really similar. There's a couple of other features of the Earl's Fortune, like the arched doorways, that they might have pulled from a pub just a road behind it called the Westminster Arms. So it was probably a few sources of inspiration, but I think this was the main one. Westminster Abbey was absolutely on point in the game. In the real world, sadly, it's missing the giant hologram out of the front of the stained glass windows, but you know, in terms of the 3D modelling, they've been extremely accurate. They added a whole load of protesters, although frankly, seeing protesters around here in Parliament Square is not uncommon, so in a way, that bit is authentic too. On the corner of Parliament Square, there's quite a famous statue of Winston Churchill here, it's quite interesting that in-game it doesn't look like Winston Churchill. It looks like some kind of, I don't know, 19th century British sailor captain or something. I'd be interested to know why they didn't use Winston Churchill's real likeness, especially as this statue is so well known. It could be that it was an aesthetic decision, but I suspect more likely it was some kind of legal issue, like they weren't allowed to use his likeness. I'd really like to find out why. Here on Westminster Bridge, they've paid really close attention to the exact designing of the streetlights, kind of the way it's divided into these 3 bulbs. It's just really cool, you know. I love the fact that they've actually bothered to look at it and really tried to make just something like a bridge feel as authentic as possible. One thing I'm really pleased they got right is that if you come out of Embankment station and turn right, there's a flower stand here, and this flower stand has been here for as long as I can remember. So it's little details like this that kind of like really hammer home the feel of the place. And even though it's got nothing to do with gameplay, it kind of just cements the realistic kind of details that you expect to see as you're walking down this road. In Victoria Embankment Gardens, they've replicated this kind of area, which is often full of chairs, as it is in the game. It's empty now just because there are no events because of the pandemic. But there's this patch of grass, which is interesting because in the game it's way, way smaller than it is here. Like, this set of gardens goes on quite a long way down there, sort of another 100 metres or so. In the game it's compressed to something more like 20 or 30 metres. And they've got some other details like that monument over there. Just things like the texture of the material match up very closely with the real world. So hats off to the artists for that one. So they have necessarily, I think, been quite careful with real name brands. So any Starbucks in the real life is called something subtly different in the game, like Staroga Coffee. I think that was done very intentionally to kind of give the feel of lots of coffee shops all over the place without actually making any copyright infringement. So just outside Embankment Station, you have this really interesting bridge over the Thames. It's actually 2 footpaths with a railway bridge in the middle, and they've modelled that pretty accurately in the game. They've definitely simplified it a fair bit, so the stairways and the ramps going down on either end, in real life, they're a complete mess. Sometimes you have to go down one place to go up another. So apart from those simplifications, they've mapped it really closely. One area they really had to get right was Trafalgar Square and the National Gallery. I think they've modelled it really well. In the game world, this is an area of quite intense protests and rioting. In the real world, it kind of changes every day. Sometimes there are protests here, and other days there might be a concert or some charity fundraising event. In this corner of Trafalgar Square, there's a monument here which changes every so often. Right now it's an ice cream with a fly and a drone and a cherry on top. In the game world, it's a kind of big crown offset at an angle. To be honest, it's really fitting. Like, they've kind of got a similar kind of vibe, because they always do something kind of interesting and provocative here. So it fits nicely, even though it's not technically the same as the real monument. So St James's Park is an interesting one. In the real world, it's way bigger than it is in the game. It'll take you a lot longer to run through the whole thing. But I was quite pleased to see that they've got some of these paths right, so they actually split through the path in the right direction, even in the game. There's more flat, grassy areas in real life, as opposed to in-game where it's kind of modelled more bushy. But some of the other details in the park are quite interesting to see how they match and how they diverge. So let's look at some of those as well. So St James's Cafe is indeed in the game world, and that's cool, although I think it's a little bigger in real life. And then interestingly, on the other side, actually on the lake in St James's Park itself, I was quite surprised to see that they've used this little island and actually put people on it in the game world, and that took me by surprise, because here it's just completely full of trees. I do wonder if they looked at Google Maps and saw an island and saw an opportunity to put some gameplay in it, or if they just wanted to kind of make the game world feel more full of people. I'm not sure. So the main bridge over the lake in St James's Park is an interesting one, because in the real world it's this kind of beautiful iron and stone bridge. It's quite iconic if you know it well. In the game world it's kind of quite a boring wooden bridge, so it would have been nice to have that detail as well. On the east side of St James's Park you see this kind of quite Swiss-style quaint little cottage called Duck Island Cottage, and they really didn't have to model this, but they did. I think I've kind of given you the taste of what they've done here, which is that they've taken the most famous landmarks and modelled them really closely, like 1-to-1 scale, and with so many of the details intact. And that's made London in the game world feel like a very authentic place. What they've done in between those places is really compress all of the distances and make them kind of more fun to get from one landmark to the other. And I think it also helped them out, because if they were on any kind of memory or processing budget, it meant that they could ship a slightly smaller map overall. And of course it made actually managing to do it all much more achievable in the time they had to develop the game. Now, if you're hoping to go and find your own house in the game world, then you might be disappointed unless you happen to live in Buckingham Palace. But if you're familiar with the landmarks, you will get a kick out of going and exploring them and kind of almost retreading the steps you took in the real world when you were on a holiday or just visiting London. See you next time.